I have a small covered patio area out behind my house where my wife and I like to relax after a long day of binge watching Netflix. Currently, there's no coffee table here, which makes it very inconvenient if we have drinks, let alone if we choose to eat outdoors as a family. I gave it some thought and designed something in Fusion 360 that would not only act as a coffee table, but could be lifted up and used as an eating surface. I'd put it on a diagonal so that once deployed, it would raise up and move inward regardless of where you're seated at the sectional sofa. After a few iterations of the design, I figured to increase stability, I could use one of the existing table legs as a stationary support. And to dress it up a bit, I figured I'd try out a herringbone pattern on the table surface. Personally, I really enjoy working with cedar. Not only does it make the entire house smell wonderful, it's got a lot of character, a great color, and it's perfect for outdoor furniture. So that's what I'm going to be using. With all that said, let's see how bad I can mess this thing up. The first order was to head to the home center and pick through about 1,000,000 boards to find just the right ones that were straight, but also had the color and the character I was looking for. I don't think the employees there were all that thrilled with me, but I did eventually give them back their forklift, so I don't know what their problem was. The table legs will be made out of this cedar 4x4, and I cut them to length over at the miter station. I clean up one of the ends and then cut each of the 4 legs to length. Then over at the joiner, I could take off the rounded edges and create a flat face on 2 of the sides. And then referencing those sides, I could get them all down to their final thickness of 3 inches by running them through the planer. Once they got close, I just kept checking with the calipers each time through until they were exactly the right size. Now it was time for me to lay out where to cut the mortises. I chose to use mortise and tenon for the table framework, but you could just as easily use pocket holes if you're more comfortable with that. And now it's time for my hollow chisel mortiser. Man, I love this squeaky tool. If you've never seen one of these before, basically it's a drill press that drills square holes. It makes cutting mortises a snap, and it's great for both building furniture as well as rupturing eardrums. Afterwards, I cleaned up the mortises just a bit with a chisel and then hyperventilated while blowing out the sawdust. Now we can move on to making the rails. There's 2 per side, so a total of 8 pieces need to be cut. I just set my stop block and then chopped away, and before you knew it, I had them all cut out in exactly the same length. I flattened one of the edges on the joiner and then cut them to their final height on the table saw while simultaneously creating cedar-scented paint sticks. Each rail gets a dado cut in one edge that will be for the side panels. You can do this without a dado stack if you don't have one, but it sure goes a lot faster if you do. If you're just going to use your regular blade, it sure helps if you have a flat top raking tooth so you at least get a smooth bottom on the dado. Next, I was on to cutting the tenons. Since I made all the shoulders exactly the same size, I could just set the dado stack to that height and then rotate the piece after each side was cut. Now for a little test fit. Then I cut a zillion little panels for the sides. And I paid a little extra for the self-sorting lumber. Everything got a thorough sanding, and then I was ready to start gluing up the tenons and fitting them into the table legs. By channeling my innermost Martha Stewart, I organized the side panels so that they looked nice. And once I slid them into place, I had a strange urge to do some insider stock trading for some reason. Fitting the next table leg into position, and then I dropped it in the clamps to dry. Once I had time to set, I could take it out of the clamps and add on another couple rails and side panels to form half of the table frame. And when I had both halves of the table frame put together, it came time to marry the two together in one stress-filled moment of glue and frantic hammering. So to make this top open up diagonally, I'll need to build an angled frame within the table. I ripped down a couple pieces and cut 45s on both ends. Then by bracing the boards with a speed square, I pre-drilled and countersunk some holes for mounting screws. I applied some glue, checked for the right angle, and then screwed them both into place. Now I could start working on the arm mechanisms for the lift top surface. Sure, you could buy lift top hardware from the store, but of the ones I saw, none of them would fit into this narrow of an opening. It would be like me trying to wear skinny jeans. It's just not gonna work. Besides, I was up for the challenge of designing it completely out of wood. Drilling out all the holes at the pivot points, and then rounding over the corners of the lift arms. The table surface mount needed to be cut down a little bit, so I handled that over at the bandsaw. And then clean up those saw marks with the spindle sander. And both of them got their mounting holes pre-drilled and countersunk. And then it was time to cut down and hammer in all the dowels. Once those dried, I could put all the pieces together and test their function. With the arms made, I could mark just where to position them on the diagonal rails. I chose not to glue this piece on, and I only used screws in case I ever needed to take the top off for any reason. Typically, it's highly discouraged that I ever take my top off, but this is just in case. Onto the table surface. I used a piece of 1/2-inch plywood as the base and then cut down some cedar to frame it out with. Since I want those pieces to conceal the edge of the plywood, I create a large rabbet by making several passes with the dado stack, flip each piece over, and then trim off the other side. Then I grab my crosscut sled on my mitering jig to cut myself a frame. The jig's at a perfect 45 degrees, so as long as I cut one end on one side and the other end on the other side, I'll end up with a perfect frame. Gluing that up and squeezing it closed in a band clamp. And I won't need any splines or dowels in those miters because I'm gluing the rabbet down to the plywood base, so it's definitely not going to go anywhere. Alright, while that's drying, let's talk a bit about the sponsor of the video, Skillshare. I was never really a good student in school. Instead, I was more of a prankster. Whether I was sneaking a whoopee cushion onto my 4th grade teacher's chair, or when I was loading up the dining hall heating registers with fish in college, the classroom experience, it just wasn't for me. But now as an adult, I can appreciate the value of an education, and thankfully, there's this great resource called Skillshare. They're an online learning community with thousands of classes covering dozens of creative and entrepreneurial skills. They've got all types of classes in categories ranging from creative, business, technology, to lifestyle. So, whether you're looking for how to start a business or how to cook a gourmet meal, Skillshare has you covered. For example, I have plenty of folks tell me that they also want to make movies like me, but they're struggling because they think they need to go buy a whole bunch of professional gear in order to do it. Skillshare has a great series of classes on how to create professional-looking video, all with tools that you already own. Now, if you'd like to try it out, I'll have a link in the video description that gets you 2 months of premium access for free. So, go check them out. All their classes are awesome, and you don't even have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. With the surface dry, I could plop it face down onto the ground and then gently set the table frame upside down on top of it and then nudge it around until it's perfectly centered. I added some glue to the top of the surface mounts and then screwed them into the bottom of the table base. Once I had both of these fastened in tight, I could flip things over and test the function for the first time.
Yes! Look at that. That's awesome. Love it.
Now I needed to figure out how long to make the support post. That'll hold the surface securely and at the right height to keep things level. I grabbed the remaining piece of 4x4, cut that to length over at the miter station. I traced the location where it needed to be on the underside of the table, and then piloted 4 holes through the table base so that I could see them from the other side. Then, by adding some glue and positioning the tabletop within the traced lines, I could drive the screws in from the top and secure it into place. In order to keep the support post from slipping off the top of the table leg, I fashioned together some V-channel that would also act as a catch. I glued together some pieces of scrap to make it, cut it to length, and then popped it into place. The next step was cutting a zillion cedar blocks for the tabletop surface design. Each one got milled down and sawn into 2-inch wide pieces on the table saw. Then turning them sideways, I could cut out a couple 1/2-inch thick pieces from each one. Now with all these little pieces, I could slather each one in some waterproof glue and then begin to put together this puzzle of a pattern. When it came time to put the pieces over the screws that were holding the support post, I just smashed the piece into them and made marks on the bottom. Then I used a Forstner bit to drill out a tiny recess for each one and then just glued it into place. All in all, laying out and gluing on this herringbone pattern took me well over an hour. It was exhausting work, but I really think it's going to pay off in the end. I sanded the top for what seemed like a century and then broke all the sharp corners and edges of the rest of the frame. And then it was time for finish. For that, I decided to go with an outdoor transparent water sealer for just this type of piece. It's super easy to apply, and it only needs 1 coat. Since this table will live outside, I'll probably have to reapply this protection every 1 to 2 years, but that's easy enough. The last thing I do is tap on some nylon feet to keep it up off the ground, and then this thing is done. Just look at that. I love the cedar sapwood highlights that are mixed in. The knots and the wavy grain lines add so much character. And the herringbone pattern on the table surface turned out awesome. It's a beautiful looking coffee table when the surface is down, and when it's time to eat, it's super easy to operate and locks right into position at the perfect height. And since it opens on the diagonal, it's perfect for everyone seated at the sectional sofa. Hey, if you'd like to build this for yourself, I'll have detailed step-by-step plans available on my website over at FisherShopOnline.com. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, this is a really fun, enjoyable project to do. I sure had a great time making it, and it turned out fantastic. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Ow! Dang it. Oh, almost put this in upside down. Oh, you idiot. Alright.
Is it recording? Punch it, Chewy. You know what I just did? I think I just cut that to the wrong length. Because I'm a giant dirt. It's supposed to be 32. Yep. I'm a moron. Oh my gosh. I am so stupid. You see anything wrong with this? I glued one of the legs on upside down. Like a complete moron. Oh my gosh. Now I gotta see if I can break it off and salvage it. Otherwise I'll just be starting from scratch. Doggone it. Oh man. Are you peeing right there? Why are you You peed on my table.